How are you doing? I know. It's a terrible time in America, a miserable time in America, but don't give up hope. We can cope. We can make this better. Apologies to Fred Rogers. I'm not Fred Rogers, and this is the furthest thing from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. But there is room for hope. I mean, 3 months from today, you have an opportunity to vote this guy out of office and vote the Republicans out of office. And we have an opportunity to take over the Senate. And that doesn't mean that this nightmare is going to end. I mean, we're going to still have COVID-19. We're still going to have racism and systemic racism. We're still going to have a country that is very, very far from what we want. We're still going to have massive unemployment, probably, but we at least won't have people actively trying to make the situation worse, from Donald Trump right through Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans. And, I mean, even Dr. Deborah Birx said yesterday, I don't know if you saw her, she said that the whole COVID-19 is going through a new phase. And she sounded the alarm. She said that it's extraordinarily widespread. I mean, this is so different from what the Trump administration line has been, that Trump this morning accused her of being pathetic because she was siding with Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it's as if this is a matter of whose side you're on. I mean, he seems incapable of understanding that this is a matter of truth. This is a matter of national crisis with regard to the number of deaths. 155,000 Americans have died so far since March, in part because he sees this as a contest in terms of what? His own power, his own virility, his own re-election. That's what this issue is all about. And Dr. Birx, she is the one who for months was feeding him data that he used to say it's okay to reopen. No problem with reopening at all. She was the one. And now she's finally seeing the light, and he is accusing her of being pathetic. And it's getting to the point, she recognizes it's getting to the point where it's almost hard or impossible to do contact tracing. That is, the tracing of people who are showing that they have positive COVID results, because there's so many of them, and because so many laboratories in this country lack the materials and the swabs and the chemicals and the machines that they need to do rapid tests and get the results out in 24 hours or 40 hours at the most. This is what other countries did. This is the way other countries brought the COVID-19 down. This is why other countries, Italy, I mean, can you imagine Italy? Italy is not the place you would imagine would have a great government and pliant citizens, but even Italy over the last 3 months has brought COVID down, and it has not conquered it completely, but at least contained the virus. And we are doing what? We are doing nothing. Donald Trump is still saying, open. He said last week he wants everything reopened. Well, that's why the virus is resurging right now, because we reopened too soon. We followed his advice. Too many governors felt the pressure coming from the White House to reopen. Too many citizens were saying, well, if he's saying reopen, we have to reopen. What is he also doing? He's tweeting about this hydroxychloroquine, which the Food and Drug Administration says is unsafe and ineffective. People have died from overdoses of it. But what is he doing? He's saying, this is what the answer is, please. You see, in 3 months, we might not be able to stop this, but we can at least have an administration and have a Congress, a Senate, that's not going to make the situation worse. What we ought to do right now, in my humble opinion, what we ought to do right now is take the 3 weeks, 4 weeks, take the month of August, have a complete lockdown, start over again. Get this under control, completely under control. Make sure everybody has full unemployment insurance, full benefits, and so they can live through the next 4 weeks. But what we ought to do is lock down now. In fact, I said this a couple of days ago. I saw yesterday the head of the Minnesota Federal Reserve came up with exactly the same idea. Many people are beginning to say we've got to start again because if Italy can do it, why can't we do it? Meanwhile, Republicans departed for a 3-day weekend without extending unemployment benefits, those $600 extra unemployment benefits, so critical to so many millions of people. 25 million people are dependent on them, but beginning this week, they don't have them. Why? Because Mitch McConnell and his Republicans would not agree to go forward with them. And let's be very clear about this. There's a lot of confusion, but you need to be clear about this. Starting in May, the Democrats in the House had a bill. They passed a piece of legislation. It had the $600 a week extension all the way through January. It had major money for state and local governments, for schools, so that schools could reopen safely. It had extra money so that we could have re-elections, and those elections and re-elections and all of the elections on November 3rd could be done safely, and they could be done through in-person mail. But what happened? The Republicans didn't want any of that. The Republicans did not want any kind of agreement. So the Republicans, it's not as if this is a logjam created by the Democrats. The fact of the matter is Republicans had 3 months from May to come up with something to begin negotiating, so they wouldn't come up to the end with nothing for anybody. And this is it's worse than a mess. It's worse than a mess, because right now you've got 25 million people who don't have any income at all. You've got 1 out of every 3 renters in the United States is actually already delayed in terms of the rent payments. They're not going to be able to make rent payments. And a lot of the eviction moratoriums are now gone. So what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks? We're going to have a huge rise, if nothing is done, huge rise in hunger and homelessness. And this is going to affect not just the very poor, this is going to affect huge numbers, millions of working class Americans, middle class Americans. And by the way, even if they came up with something tomorrow, it's not going to help, because state unemployment insurance offices, and I know this because I used to supervise state unemployment insurance. State unemployment insurance offices need weeks to reprogram, even if the Senate goes along with the House and says, okay, we agree, finally, we're going to go and continue the $600 a week extra unemployment benefits. It doesn't matter, because you still have to reprogram those unemployment insurance systems at the state level, and that's going to take weeks. So people are going to be out of luck, even if everything worked right now. If Mitch McConnell and the Republicans said, okay, we've seen the light. This is also going to hurt, by the way, huge numbers of other people, because you see, when you put money in people's pockets, unemployment insurance money, they then have the wherewithal to buy, to keep the economy going. And the estimate is that 3 to 5 million people who now have jobs are going to lose their jobs. Why? Because people don't have the money to keep those jobs going. People are no longer collecting unemployment insurance. In other words, unemployment insurance is just about the best stimulus we have in this country to keep the economy going. You take away those extra unemployment benefits, and there is no stimulus. The average unemployment insurance, regular unemployment insurance, covers 45% of previous job pay. And you've got all these contract workers and freelancers, they don't even qualify for unemployment insurance. That's why you needed the $600 extra. That was the whole idea. That's why it was put into the original CARES Act. That's why the Democrats in the House have renewed it. And what are the Republicans doing? They are saying, and I heard Steve Mnuchin say, I mean, every time I hear a billionaire, a banker say, oh, well, we can't possibly allow average people to have $600 a week extra because they will be discouraged from actually finding a job. First of all, there are no jobs out there. All right. Secondly, as I said, you want money in people's pockets so they can go out and spend. But thirdly, there is no evidence, zero evidence, that if you give people $600 a week extra, that deters them from finding jobs. When you have a Great Depression like we have right now, and this is a Great Depression, 1 out of every 5 people is unemployed. There are not jobs out there. There are 14 million more unemployed than there are jobs. So don't tell me, Mr. Mnuchin, that you can't possibly afford, we can't possibly afford to do this, and that people are going to get lazy while you are at the same time giving billions of dollars in subsidies and bailouts to big corporations and to big banks. You think we're that stupid? There is no disincentive to work from getting $600 extra in a national emergency, in a pandemic like we are in. Which brings me to Donald Trump and what he is doing meanwhile. I mean, you see, not only is he saying everybody should get back to school and reopen the economy and all of that, which is utterly irresponsible at a time when the coronavirus is getting worse, but he's also suggesting delaying the election. Now, you've got to understand that is illegal. The Constitution gives authority to the states to determine when the election actually is in terms of the process of the election, but gives authority to Congress to determine precisely the day of the election. And Congress, by statute, has made that day the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, that is November 3rd. Donald Trump cannot unilaterally change that. He doesn't have any power to do that. He's doing that because, you see, his whole strategy is to make us lose confidence in our election system. He wants to call into question the integrity of the entire United States election system. He wants to spread false rumors about mail-in ballots. Here's another thing. He says, oh, well, absentee ballots are fine. Absentee ballots are good. He used the expression good, but mail-in ballots are bad. There is no difference, folks. Mail-in ballots and absentee ballots are exactly the same thing. Even Republican operatives, political operatives, and Republican governors and Republicans out there in the field, they're getting nervous because they know how many Republicans vote absentee. Even Trump and his family votes absentee, and they're worried that by casting all these doubts on mail-in absentee votes, that Trump actually may be hurting Republican turnout. But you need to know, not only are mail-in ballots safe, there is no evidence of fraud. They are safe. Absentee ballots are the same thing as mail-in ballots. And you ought to, as soon as you can, make sure that you are registered, make sure you are getting an absentee ballot. About 70% of all voters do qualify for an absentee ballot. Make sure most states do allow you to vote absentee. This pandemic is going to go on. There's no question about it through November at the very least. So you probably need an absentee ballot. What Donald Trump wants to do is create, as he usually does, fear and chaos and worry and anxiety. So people are worried about the election. They're worried about absentee ballots. They're worried about voter fraud. So he, at the end of the day, can claim that the election was wrong, was tainted. He wants to come in after the election. And this is part of his grand plan. He wants to come in after the election and say this was illegitimate, this election. He's going to, and by the way, I want you to be prepared for this. Because Election Day, November 3rd, marks the end of the election, but because of all the absentee ballots, we're probably not going to know for days. It may be weeks. So don't expect election night we're going to necessarily know. You also need to expect that Donald Trump is going to contest this election. In fact, even recently, last week, he said he's not going to pledge not to contest the election. He's not going to pledge to be bound by the electoral results. So you can bet that he is going to immediately cry foul and fraud as soon as those returns start coming in. He's going to demand a commission. This could go on for a month or maybe 2 months. It could go on all the way up to election, not the inauguration. I mean, how do we get him out? I mean, let's just assume that he loses not only the popular vote, but also the electoral college vote this time. And that's not an impossible assumption because his polls are dropping like stones. He knows that. That's why he's worried. That's why he wants to cast doubt on the entire election system. But let's just follow this through. What happens if he contests it and he doesn't want to concede? Our entire political system depends upon a peaceful transition of power. Now, Donald Trump is not going to make a peaceful transition of power. He's probably going to rev up his followers. He's going to make all kinds of threats. Ultimately, the Supreme Court may have to get involved. And I believe that even with the Trump appointees on the Supreme Court, that if he loses the electoral college vote, they're going to say, no, he's got to leave. And then what happens? What happens if he then stays? Well, maybe the military has got to get involved. Before the military gets involved, I'd just say, let's just turn off the electricity to the White House, including get rid of the internet access. That'll get him out, right? You know, the other thing he wants to do, and I just want to mention this before I go to your questions, and I have a question for you. Before I go to the questions, I just want to say he's also, and this is part of his concerted strategy, he's put in a fellow to be Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. You probably have never heard of him. He's going to be an important figure because on July 14th, this Postmaster General, a Trump supporter, a major Trump figure, a major Trump backer, $2 million to the Trump campaign. That's the only way he's there. He knows nothing about the mail. He knows nothing about communication. He knows nothing about transportation. He's a Trump lackey. He's a Trump sycophant. What did he do on July 14th? He actually made what he called cost-cutting moves. And those cost-cutting moves in the United States Postal Service are causing delays in the Postal Service. There are lag times. Those lag times are growing. He doesn't want to provide overtime. In other words, the cost-cutting measures could conceivably make voting by mail, absentee voting, same thing, more difficult. Now, I don't want to conjure up a plot. There are too many conspiracy theories around already, but I do want to express to you my concern that we've got to make sure that there is a postal service that is efficient and a postal service that gets the votes and can make sure that this election that is going to have to be by mail-in ballots works. All right? I've sounded as much of an alarm as I possibly can. Now, before I turn to your questions, I have a question for you. Here's my question, this week's question. I want you to name for all of us, because we'll be posting all of this, not your name, but I want you to vote, and you'll see an opportunity for you to vote right popping up there on your screen. Who is harming America the most right now, other than Trump? Now, I know it's going to be very hard, but I want to give you three options. Option A, who's harming America the most other than Trump right now? Option A is William Barr, the Attorney General. Option B is Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader. Option C is Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook. All right, those are your options. Question, who is harming America the most right now? We'll get and just vote right now. A for William Barr, B for Mitch McConnell, C for Mark Zuckerberg. And we'll get you the results as quickly as we have them, probably in about a few minutes. Last week's results The question was, of the three that I'm going to give you last week, I said, who do you support to be the vice presidential candidate for Joe Biden? And the options I gave you last week were Kamala Harris, number A, or Elizabeth Warren, B, or neither. That is, I have another preference, C. 10 minutes after I asked that question, about 6,000, 7,000 of you voted, and you were for, about 37% of you, 36% of you were for Elizabeth Warren, and second were for Kamala Harris. Since then, we've had about 21,770 of you voting. It's not a sample. This is not a sample, obviously, because we're only talking about people who bothered to vote and people who tuned in. But it's interesting nonetheless. The final results for Elizabeth Warren, 37.6% of you, and for Kamala Harris, 25.8% of you, and neither, 36.6% of you. Again, that's 21,700 votes. So let's have your vote in terms of who's harming America the worst right now. And while we're waiting for your vote, let me just answer your questions. Elaine Granholm, if Trump loses, what's to stop him from leaving office before January 20th and have Pence become the president? Elaine, there's nothing stopping Trump from leaving office. He hates to lose, and maybe he will want to leave Trump as Pence as president. The reason that I worry about him doing that, actually, is that he might make a deal with Pence. And that deal would be, I'll make you president, Pence, and you pardon me for all my crimes now and in the past and in the future. This is what Gerald Ford did for Richard Nixon. If in other words, if Trump feels like he has no option, that he's definitely lost, and there's no other way to go, and he doesn't want to go through the inauguration. That would be, he'd lose face. And he's worried about being indicted for his criminal activity before or after or during his presidency. He may seek a pardon from Pence. I think that's very likely. Be on the lookout. Be vigilant. Diana Tivoli, what's your response to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who says a few $100 in unemployment benefits makes American workers lazy? Diana, that's absolute rubbish. We know there is nothing to that. In fact, there was a study done just a few weeks ago by a bunch of economists from Yale University. They looked at all the data we have and found there is no disincentive effect in terms of working or jobs from that $600 a week extra. Wanda Whitaker, can't the Senate force McConnell to bring important bills up for vote? It's hard to understand how he has so much power. Wanda, Mitch McConnell, as the Senate Majority Leader, does have the power in the Senate to decide what's going to come up for votes. There are 250 bills that have come from the House, including the HEROES Act that we've been talking about in May. And they're on Mitch McConnell's desk, or they're maybe in his drawer. He's not doing anything about them, and he's not letting the Senate vote. And there's nothing that the Senate can do to force him. A majority of the Senate, presumably the senators could change the rule, but the Republicans are in the majority. Jennifer Whitehorse, what do you think needs to happen to contain COVID since reopening seems to have caused a resurgence? Jennifer, I suggested what we need to do. Start over, reboot, take the next 3 to 4 weeks in a almost total lockdown. Give people full unemployment insurance benefits in the meantime, and have a moratorium on rent. The next 4 weeks, August would be a good time to do this. Leslie Champo, if the entire country shuts down for 6 to 8 weeks with government support, wouldn't that cost less in the long run? Leslie, you're right. That's my point. It would get the economy back on track faster. It would cost less in the short run. Ashton Durham, are Republicans driving the economy toward a wall now so the Democrats will have to expend all their political capital cleaning up later? That's been the pattern, hasn't it? That's what we've seen in administration after administration. I mean, I was part of an administration, Bill Clinton's administration, where we had to clean up from the mess of George H.W. Bush. I mean, the debt mess. Every Democratic administration, certainly in the last 40 years that I'm aware of, 50 years, has had to clean up from the mess left from the Republican, an economic mess, usually an economic mess. And there's no question that Joe Biden is going to have to spend a lot of time cleaning up because you can't even go anywhere to any corner of public policy in this country now and not run into a mess created by or exacerbated by the Trump administration. Let's see, Kathleen Garvey. Isn't the post office mandated in the Constitution to function? Aren't our lawmakers required to support, if not fund, the post office? No, Kathleen. Here's the Constitution says that Congress may control or have a post office or provide for a post office, but it just allows the federal government to have a post office. It doesn't require that there be a post office. And that's you might want to check your own Constitution. Article 1, Section 3. That's my memory. Maya Valencia. Are the millions of people at risk of being evicted also at risk of losing their ability to vote? Maya, no. In other words, if you are evicted, if you don't have an address, it becomes harder to vote. There's no question. Logistically, it becomes harder. You've got to make sure you're registered, and to register, you usually have to have a prime address. And you also, if you're homeless, it's going to be very hard for you to communicate generally. But the states don't require, most states don't require that you have to have, that if you don't have a prime address, you can't vote. That would be an obstacle to voting that I believe would be unconstitutional. But Maya, the point is we're going to have huge numbers of people who are, because of the lack of $600 a week unemployment benefits coming in, and because there are so many people who owe so much in rent already, we are going to, unfortunately, sadly, tragically, be facing a huge tsunami of evictions coming up, I mean, within the next few weeks. Claire Chen, do you think after last week's antitrust hearings in Congress that they will actually try and break up big tech? Claire, I don't think that who the they is. Well, certainly the Republicans are not going to try to break up big tech. There is no question that the big, Google and Apple and Facebook and Amazon, certainly, they have 20% of the entire United States economy. People don't understand this. Each of these companies is huge, is over $1 trillion. And each of these four companies has a huge effect on the market. Together, they are almost a quarter. If you throw in Microsoft, it's a quarter of the entire United States economy. Now, we haven't seen this degree of concentration since the 1890s, since the days of the robber barons. And those four high-tech CEOs who appeared before Congress last week, they are today's robber barons. I mean, they are really the people who are monopolizing. And why don't we use antitrust? I think because so much of the money that supports political campaigns, sadly, on both sides of the aisle, is coming from high tech. And so that if we have a genuine, like we did starting in 1901, a genuine progressive period again, then I think antitrust, anti-monopoly is going to be absolutely critical. All right, the poll results are in, and I would like to show you what they have been. Remember, my question was, who's harming America the worst? Is it William Barr, Mitch McConnell, or Mark Zuckerberg? And here we have your results. William Barr, 22% of you think William Barr is harming America the most. Now, this is separate from Donald Trump. 69% of you say Mitch McConnell, and only 9% of you say Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg, I'm sure you're watching. You must be breathing a huge sigh of relief. I know this was a tense poll for you. Mitch McConnell, I'm surprised that you beat William Barr by that degree. I mean, that's a huge. Mitch McConnell, you are somebody who is loathed by certainly the people out there who are watching this program. But I think that you're loathed generally anyway. I mean, even in Kentucky, you're not doing all that well. And hopefully the Democrats will take over the Senate, and hopefully you will be out of a job, Mitch McConnell, because hopefully you will not even be a senator anymore. Thank you for the poll, and thank you for all of you for hanging in there. These are the hardest times that I remember, and there doesn't seem to be any easy out. There's no kind of easy off ramp, but just hang in there. And know that we together will make a difference. We've got 3 months to go, and you and I, make sure you're registered, make sure you get everybody else to register, make sure you understand how to vote by mail. That is absentee ballot, same thing. Don't fall for the Trump propaganda. Make sure nobody else falls for the Trump propaganda. And we'll see you next week. Be safe, be well.